The cardboard box on my desk held 4 years of my life, and it was already half full before I let myself feel anything about it. It was a Friday. I remember that clearly, because Marcus always saved the worst news for a Friday, when there was no time left in the week for anyone to ask questions. I taped the bottom flap without looking at it, because looking meant thinking, and thinking meant I might stop moving. My badge sat next to my keyboard, deactivated that morning by someone in IT I had never even met. Marcus had not come to say it himself. He sent an email at 8 a.m. with the subject line effective immediately, and let HR handle the rest. He thought he was firing a nobody. What he did not know was that someone had been listening for a long time, and it was not who he thought. If you have ever been made to feel small in a room you helped build, stay with me. This one is for you. I packed my mug, my stress ball from the wellness fair, the framed photo I never bothered to angle toward my monitor. A coworker walked past, said nothing, kept her eyes on her screen. That was the unwritten rule here. Don't look too long at someone on their way out. My phone buzzed on the desk. Blocked number. I turned it face down without answering, and told myself it was nothing. It would not stay nothing for long. 3 months earlier, I sat in that same conference room believing I was about to become the new operations lead. Marcus had told me himself, over coffee, that the promotion was mine to lose. Then Monday came, and he stood at the head of the table presenting my compliance report as if he had built it line by line. He said, "This is the kind of forward-thinking leadership we need more of on this team," and nodded at himself like the words had just occurred to him. Nobody corrected him. I sat 2 seats down, watching people write his name in their notes instead of mine. After that, the calendar invites got smaller. I stopped getting looped into the vendor calls I used to run. My badge still opened the same doors, but somehow I was never in the room anymore. HR called it a restructuring. I called it being erased one meeting at a time. I told myself it did not matter, that the work would speak for itself eventually. I kept every email. I kept every version history. I did not know yet why that habit would matter. My phone lit up on the desk, a message from Rachel in accounting. "Did you see what he just said about you in the all hands?" I did not open Rachel's message. I did not need to. 10 minutes later, I got a calendar invite from HR titled Quick Sync, no agenda, and I already knew what that meant. I walked into the small conference room and found Marcus already sitting there with Denise from HR, a folder open in front of them like they had rehearsed the moment. Marcus slid a printed compliance filing across the table and said, "This went out with the wrong figures attached, and it has your name on the submission log." I looked at it once and knew exactly what had happened. I had flagged that exact discrepancy in an email 2 weeks earlier, and he had told me not to worry about it, he would handle the sign-off himself. I said that out loud, calmly, and asked if we could pull up the email thread. Denise wrote something on her notepad and slid a document across the table instead. It was a performance improvement plan with my name already typed at the top, dated that morning. I asked Marcus directly if this was really about a filing error. He leaned back in his chair, almost amused, and said, "Look, nothing personal, you are replaceable, Claire, everyone here is." I did not answer him. I picked up a pen, signed where they told me to sign, and walked back to my desk with my hands steadier than I expected. My office phone rang once, sharp and sudden, then went silent before I could reach it. No name on the caller ID. Just a blank screen where an answer should have been. I put the phone down and did what I always did when something felt off, I wrote it down. Time, date, who was in the room, exact wording. Marcus walked past my desk once and caught me doing it, glanced at the notebook, and said, "You and your notes, Claire, nobody reads that stuff." I told him I liked keeping good records, and left it at that. That night I stayed late, long after most of the floor had cleared out and the cleaning crew had started on the far end. I opened a plain folder on my laptop, no label, no tab color, just a string of numbers I would recognize and no one else would. I dropped a few files into it and closed the laptop without saving anything to the shared drive. On my way out, I badged through the door near the compliance office instead of the main exit, the way I sometimes did to avoid Marcus lingering by the elevators. The reader blinked red for a second longer than usual before it finally turned green. I barely noticed it at the time. I had somewhere to be. Keep that detail in mind. It matters later. I picked up my bag and walked to my car in an empty lot, checking my phone one more time for a callback that never came. Friday afternoon, 3 weeks into the performance improvement plan that was never going to end any other way, Denise called me back into that same small conference room. This time Marcus did not even bother sitting across from me. He stood by the door with a single sheet of paper and slid it onto the table without looking up. "Effective today, your employment with the company is terminated," he said, reading it like a weather report. He mentioned something about at-will employment, about the decision being final, about IT already disabling my system access. I noticed he used the word decision like it belonged to someone else, not to him. I asked if this was connected to the filing error, the one that was never actually mine. He said, "Honestly, Claire, it does not matter anymore, the company will survive just fine without you." I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I picked up the pen sitting on top of the severance paperwork and signed where the sticky arrow told me to sign, my handwriting steadier than I expected it to be. Denise slid a folder toward me, health insurance continuation forms, a final paycheck summary, a line about returning my badge, the one that had scanned a half-second slow the night before. I stood up, smoothed my jacket, and walked out through the lobby without looking back at either of them. Outside, the air was sharp and the parking lot was thinning out for the weekend. Parked directly in front of the entrance sat a black SUV that had not been there that morning, engine running, windows dark. A man in a plain gray suit stepped out of the SUV before I even reached my car, and my first instinct was to keep walking, head down, box under my arm. He said my name, full name, Claire Whitfield, in a tone that was calm but certain, the kind of certain that told me he already knew exactly who I was. I stopped walking. A second person, a woman, came around the other side of the vehicle holding a slim folder of her own, nothing like the one I had just signed inside. The man said, "My name is Agent Colton, this is Agent Reyes, we are with the Securities and Exchange Commission, and I need a few minutes of your time." For a moment I thought this was some final indignity Marcus had arranged, one more way to embarrass me on my way out the door. Then Agent Reyes said, "We wanted to reach you before you left the property. We did not expect the timing to line up with your termination today." I asked what this was about, my voice flatter than I expected, given everything else that had happened that afternoon. Agent Colton said, "For the past 14 months, you have been a cooperating witness in an active federal investigation into financial reporting inside this company, and every document you logged has been under legal review." I stood there in that parking lot and thought about the unlabeled folder on my laptop, the one Marcus had mocked as just Claire and her notes. It had never been a personal habit. It had been an evidence log, maintained under an agreement I had signed over a year ago, the kind of agreement that came with its own restricted access, its own compliance floor clearance that had nothing to do with my actual job title. Agent Reyes added, quieter this time, "That badge delay you probably noticed on the compliance floor, that was our access level, not an error." I asked, almost without meaning to, if that phone in my office, the one that rang and went silent, if that had been them too. Agent Colton nodded once and said, "That was our secure line, Ms. Whitfield. We have been listening for a long time." I did not feel anything close to victory standing in that parking lot. I just nodded, gave Agent Colton my updated phone number, and got into my car like I had done 1,000 ordinary days before this one. I drove home, made coffee I did not really want, and sat at my kitchen table with my old badge still clipped uselessly to my bag. I heard about the rest of it the way most people did, in pieces, over the following week. A former coworker texted me Monday morning saying Marcus had been pulled into a closed-door meeting with outside counsel before 9 a.m., no explanation given on the calendar invite beyond legal matter, confidential. Nobody on the floor knew why. I did. By Tuesday, Rachel from accounting sent me a message with 3 exclamation points, saying the board had called an emergency session and that Marcus's login credentials for the financial reporting systems had been suspended before lunch, pending review. She asked if I had heard anything. I told her only that I hoped everyone there was doing okay, and left it at that. Thursday afternoon, I was sitting on my couch, not really watching the television in front of me, when my phone buzzed with a business news alert. I almost swiped it away out of habit before the headline caught my eye: Federal investigation confirmed into reporting practices under outgoing executive Marcus Reed. I read it twice. Not because I did not believe it, but because I had spent 14 months being the only person who knew this sentence was coming, and now it belonged to everyone. Underneath the headline, a smaller line scrolled past: company shares down sharply in early trading following the announcement. I set the phone face down on the couch cushion, the same way I used to set it down at my old desk when a blocked number called and I was not ready to answer yet. This time I was not avoiding anything. I was simply letting it happen without me. My phone started ringing again that same evening, and this time the caller ID was not blank. It was Marcus. I let it go to voicemail. 10 minutes later he called again. Then a text came through, short and clipped: "We need to talk, call me back." By the next morning there was an email in my personal inbox marked urgent in the subject line, something about how there had clearly been a misunderstanding, how he was sure we could clear things up if I would just call him directly. I did not respond to any of it. My attorney, a straightforward woman named Patricia who had been assigned to me through the cooperation agreement, told me plainly, "Do not engage, everything goes through counsel now, and I intend to hold on to that advice." Marcus did not seem to accept that as an answer. A week later, my attorney called to tell me he had shown up in person outside the federal building downtown on the day of a scheduled interview, asking to speak with me before I went inside. Building security stopped him at the entrance. He gave his name, said it like it still meant something, and was told plainly that he was not on any visitor list for that day. The following week, there was a settlement conference scheduled between his legal team and the company's board. Patricia mentioned, almost in passing, that he had assumed he would be permitted to sit in on part of it, given his former title. He arrived at the office building where it was being held and was met by a receptionist who checked a list twice and told him the meeting was closed to unauthorized personnel. The door did not open. He stood in that lobby for several minutes before he left. I did not see any of this happen. I only heard about it secondhand, calm reports relayed through an attorney's careful phrasing, and somehow that made it feel more real, not less. Then, on an ordinary Wednesday, my phone buzzed with a message from a name I recognized instantly. It was Danielle, someone I used to eat lunch with most Fridays at the old office. Her message just said, "Claire, was it really you this whole time?" I did not answer Danielle right away. I sat with the message for a long moment, then typed back a simple yes, and set the phone aside. Some things did not need an explanation attached. 2 weeks later, Patricia told me the case had reached its final stage, a formal deposition where both sides would be present, along with a proposed settlement Marcus's attorneys were prepared to sign. She asked if I wanted to attend in person or appear remotely. I told her I wanted to be there. The room was smaller than I expected: plain table, water pitcher, a court reporter set up quietly in the corner. Marcus was already seated when I walked in, his suit slightly less sharp than I remembered, his hands folded in front of him like he was rehearsing something. When it was his turn to speak, before the formal questioning even began, he looked at me and said, "I didn't know, Claire, any of it. If I had known who you were talking to, what you were building a case around, I would have." I let him finish, then said, calmly, "That was never the point, Marcus. You didn't know because you never once thought it was worth finding out." He did not have a response to that. His attorney nudged the settlement papers toward the center of the table. I reviewed my portion with Patricia beside me, then signed my name where the tab indicated, steady, unhurried, the same way I had signed my own termination letter weeks earlier, except this time the paper meant something entirely different. I gathered my folder, thanked the court reporter, and stood up without looking back at Marcus. At the door, I paused only long enough to say one last thing, not raised, not dramatic, just clear. "You spent years deciding I wasn't worth paying attention to. That was never my failure to fix." Then I walked out, past the reception desk, into the hallway, and out through the front doors into ordinary daylight. Behind me, through the glass, I caught a brief glimpse of Marcus still sitting at that table, then later standing alone outside the building, phone in his hand, scrolling like he was looking for someone to call. Nobody from that room walked out with him. 6 months later, I sat at the head of a conference table again, except this time it was my table, in an office with my name on the compliance director title outside the door. A different company, a different industry, a team that actually looped me into the calls instead of around them. I still kept notes on everything, out of habit more than necessity now. A junior analyst on my team once asked why I documented so much, half joking that it seemed excessive. I told her, some habits saved my career once, I am not about to break them now. Recruiters had started reaching out on their own, drawn by a case that had made its way through industry circles without my name ever needing to be the headline. I turned down 2 offers before accepting this one, not because the titles were wrong, but because I finally had the standing to ask what a workplace owed me, instead of just accepting what I was given. What surprised me most was not the new office, or the better salary, or even the respect that came easier now. It was smaller than that. It was waking up on an ordinary Tuesday and realizing I had not spent a single minute making myself smaller for someone else's comfort. Sometimes I still think about that Friday afternoon, the letter sliding across the table, the way he never once looked up while he handed me my termination. He thought he was firing someone with nothing left to lose. He was wrong. If any part of this story felt familiar, if you have ever been dismissed by someone who never bothered to see what you were actually capable of, tell me in the comments which moment hit you the hardest. Share this with someone who has ever been underestimated at work, because they need to hear that the story is not over just because someone else decided it was. Subscribe, because there is more to this than what you just saw. If you want to know what happened to Marcus after the verdict, that story is already waiting.